Faiths for Truth support group. If you're new to the group, I'm Jules Lane, and we are going through Barb Raveling's brand new study, Rally. It's really good, and if you want to jump in, that's fine, but be sure to start at the beginning, the intro, and work your way through and rejoin us. All these lessons build on each other, and I don't want you to miss out. Okay, guys, we are at the end of week 2, chapter 2. Which path are you on? I hope you dove into it and saw some growth this week. I know I did, especially whenever I looked at path number 1, which leads to our coping mechanisms. Oh my goodness, I will never view coping the same again. Recently, we were putting new baseboards in our bathroom. And if you've ever done this, then you know that a lot of times, most of the time, rarely, I guess, our inside right corners, right angled corners, they are not true. And so finding the angle to that can be a pain. To do a baseboard into the corner where you have to miter it. Normally you would miter the two pieces so they met up all perfectly aligned and it would be beautiful. But when they're not true, that is a much more difficult and much more time consuming. So they have this method called coping where you take, yes, coping, I know, right? So you take one of the boards and you just blunt it into the corner, and the other one you take and you carve it out basically along the profile of this baseboard so that it just fits up against it really nicely. It gives the illusion that you've mitered that corner when you haven't. Likewise, when we use those coping mechanisms, which Barb lists 13 in this section of path 1, when we use those coping mechanisms, it gives the illusion that we're dealing with the issue, that we're dealing with the trial, that we're just, woohoo, we're working it. But it's not true. It's an illusion. We're not actually growing. We're turning to something other than God to cope with what's going on. And sometimes those things are good for, temporary purposes, but most of the time when they lead you away from God instead of toward God, they're not good. And especially if they're unhealthy coping mechanisms like overeating and stuff like that. Yeah, I can relate. So they aren't good for us. I don't know about you guys, but I was able to circle 9 of the 13. 9 that I use frequently, that I could relate to so strongly. It's rather embarrassing to admit. But as I've gotten older, I'm realizing that these coping mechanisms have become a habit. And so I instantly go to them instead of going to God because it's a habit. But the interesting thing is, they no longer are as effective as I thought they were years ago. So years ago, it's great. I could deal with it, coping, whatever. And they seemed effective, more effective than they are now. As I get older, I'm realizing they're more and more ingrained, but less and less effective, which is really sad. So this leads me to God. Whenever I think that this is less effective, so then actually this is a good thing because it leads me to God, which leads me to path number 2, okay? So path number 2 is when we go to God with our own agenda, okay? Tell me you can relate, because I know I can. I can tell you what, I could tell God exactly what needs to happen. For every trial I've ever been through, I could come up with a solution and be like, this is what needs to go down, Lord. This is how this needs to be fixed. This is blah, 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 blah. You got it. You guys do it too. Come on. I know we do. So we go to God with our own agenda. And sometimes I'll cycle through. I'll do the coping mechanisms. And then when that stops working, then it's like, okay, I need to go to God now. But God, this is what I want you to do. I want you to fix it, and I want you to make it better, and no more pain, please. That's what I do. But every time I take this path with my own agenda, I end up getting frustrated and angry because a lot of times his ways are not my ways. And so he has a whole different idea of how things should go down. And whenever I'm sitting there going, no, I want it my way, then I'm not growing then either, am I? So, you know, even whenever I go to God, and sometimes my motives are more pure, right? So we can think, well, every time we have an idea of how it could be fixed isn't necessarily a bad thing, like especially when we're praying for somebody else to be healed, right? That's a good thing. But sometimes, if we're honest, sometimes we're asking God for those things because this person's illness or sickness or whatever is affecting us negatively, and we really want them off our worry list. I know that sounds really horrible, but sometimes we feel that way. And it just is good to be honest and say, you know what, I'm a sinner. I have negative thoughts. I have, thoughts that have not pure motivation behind them. And even my prayers sometimes aren't purely motivated. They're motivated by selfish gain. And so I can admit I'm a sinner, and I know you're a sinner. God says we're all sinners. We've fallen short of the glory of God. So I know I'm not alone. But I also know that we don't have to stay in the place of repeating this pattern over and over again, because we are children of the one true King. If you are, then you have access to power to not fall for that anymore. And so we can still grow. We can grow. God can grow us. Thankfully, I think I've grown from yesterday even. So we should grow a little bit each day. We're not going to have arrived today. Our agenda is still going to sneak in. So, the growth, though, it doesn't come from these coping mechanisms. It doesn't come from demanding our own way. It comes from going to God, and path number 3 that she mentions, going to God, seeking His agenda. What does He want? Where are His plans going? That's what we want. His agenda. And I love this section about going to God for His, probably it may be my favorite. My favorite account in the Bible is of those 3 Hebrew boys in captivity who are facing the fiery furnace because they refuse to bow down to false gods. They are willing to die rather than cope. They are willing to die rather than have their own agenda. They are willing to die for what they believe, and this is a big deal. They testified that God could save them. God could fix the situation. He could keep them from death. He could stop it somehow. But they acknowledged that if He doesn't, they are still going to worship Him and not the false gods. They are still going to choose Him. And I wonder how many times is that our sticking point? Do we sit there and go, well, if I stand up and I say, no, I'm not going to worship coping anymore, and my coping mechanisms, and rely on them fully instead of fully relying on God, and even if God doesn't answer this trial and fix it the way I want Him to, I will love and obey and trust Him despite it all. This is a group where most, if not all of us, deal with weight in some way, our extra weight, food issues, and stuff like that. What if you gave it over and you just had to say, God, even if I am overweight till the day I die, I will love you anyway. I will love, trust, and obey you anyway. I will seek your face anyway. I wonder if we had Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's mentality and attitude, how that would change things. And so that's my question to you. Well, actually, I have a couple of questions. Let me see what they are. My question for you today is this. What would your attitude toward your trial be if you faced it like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego faced Nebuchadnezzar and the fiery furnace? What would you gain if you refused to live in the illusion of coping and chose to live in the reality of God's loving arms? Could you say to Him, God, this is what I want in this trial. But even if that's not part of your agenda, I will still love you with all my heart, soul, and mind. Maybe you're not at that point yet. I have some things that I can say, I don't think I'm at that point. God help my unbelief, but I don't think I'm at that point. And maybe you're not there. And that's okay. God's going to meet you where you are. He knows where you are. He knows what trials you're going through and have gone through. My hope is that as we continue through this study and we learn how to rally, that our hearts and minds will change in a positive way. And tomorrow we take the next step toward that end with beginning chapter 3. And chapter 3 is on renewing your mind. Most of us already know what that is, but it's going to be great review, and I hope that you'll still jump in and study, and seek the face of God, guys, this week. That's love God and others well. That's our mission. And so let's head for it, and let's work hard. Let's study to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed. Okay? And really think about this week as you go through this next week and you start to recognize those coping mechanisms, and you start to recognize when you're demanding your own way in your prayer with the Lord, and really let the Holy Spirit convict you of that so we can turn and go a different direction. All right, guys, that wraps up chapter 2. I hope that you're sticking with me. Keep studying. Don't let the trials get in the way, and I will see you on the Facebook group.